Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us today. I'm very happy to have all of you for our March user call here. My name is Dalia and I work on Kong's community team. So today we have a very special presentation for you. You're going to hear what's new, all the new updates in Kong Gateway 3.2 and Kong Ingress Controller 2.9. We have Michael and Tom with us. They will introduce themselves. Please input all of your questions in the Q&A function on the bottom, and we will take them after they're finished with their presentation. So with that, Tom, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining. My name is Tom Brightbill. I'm a product manager for the Kong Gateway. And I'm going to talk to you today about what's coming in Kong Enterprise 3.2. So this is just a slide going over what some of the key highlights are. So at a high level, we're trying to bucket what we're delivering in this release in these couple categories. So in the kind of reliability and simplified API management category, we have a feature that we're calling Dataplane Scale Out. This is something I'm really excited about and something that will definitely make, I think, platform operators feel more at ease when there's any sort of outage or issue. And I'll explain more about that one in a future slide. We also have some kind of long-awaited Kong Manager updates just to have the UI kind of catch up with some of the new features that we've offered and making it easier to manage in the UI for users that do so. On the security and compliance side, we are announcing FIPS compliance for all first-party plugins. So this actually builds off of our work in 3.1, where we established basically using FIPS compliant crypto libraries for all kind of core components of Kong. And this extends that work to make sure that we're using those same libraries for all plugins that are first-party. So now we're FIPS compliant both for core and plugin, and we're continuing to offer FIPS builds for our enterprise customers. Additionally, we also have global session support for OIDC now. So if you're using the same session across multiple applications, you can configure that in our OIDC plugin instead of having a configuration for each application, as long as they share the sessions. And then on the performance side, we're introducing latency-based steering. So this uses the EWMA algorithm, which is something weighted mean average. Basically taking the average of all of the upstreams and then routing to the one that has the quickest average response based on where the request is coming in. So I'm going to jump into like a couple of these items in more detail in the next few slides. If I can get my cursor to cooperate. So this is the Dataplane scale out feature. And essentially what this does is it provides a layer of redundancy for data planes, both existing, new, or restarting data planes to pull down configuration in the event of either an outage of the control plane or some kind of network jitter or issue or a firewall even perhaps between data planes and control planes. And so really how this works is that we're establishing a new type of node, which is essentially a data plane, but it's run with a particular flag that establishes its identity as a backup node. And essentially all that backup node does is that it receives configuration from the control plane, and then it posts that configuration up to an S3 compatible bucket, either in GCP or AWS. And what will happen is that the data planes, either that are existing or new data planes that you bring online, if they're unable to reach out to the control plane, and there's logic in there for retries and timeouts and stuff like that, they will then go and then look at this bucket to pull down the most recent configuration that's available. And so this basically just creates kind of like a backup for configuration in one of the most durable and stable places that's imaginable. So I think what this addresses for our customers is that, if there's some reason that you need to scale, let's say, and at the same time you're having an issue, some kind of network problem with your control plane, you could rest assured that you can scale up your data planes with the most recent configuration that's available and also bring new ones online. I would say additionally too, the backup is pretty intelligent. So like, for example, if your data planes are running different versions for some reason, the backup that's stored is actually pinned per version. So the data plane will know, I am running this version type, therefore, I should grab the key for the configuration that's backed up for my particular version type. So this is a long requested ask. I think it adds a lot around stability and kind of our resiliency story. So we're really excited about this one, and it's really easy to set up too. So it's just one flag on this backup node, and then each data plane, of course, has to have authorization and knowledge of what the bucket is that is storing the backup configuration. So moving forward, yeah, we're talking about FIPS compliance. So, this is something that we're offering only for Kong Enterprise. And I should say also that the previous, this is also an enterprise only feature. This particular one is for FIPS compliance. And so for people who aren't aware, FIPS 140-2 is basically a government specification that governs basically how data is encrypted inside of a piece of software. Typically what you do here is that you find a version of a crypto library that already meets this specification and you implement it. So some common ones are Boring SSL, right, which is maintained by Google. Actually, OpenSSL's 3.0 version also has a FIPS mode. And what we've done in our implementation is that we've adopted Boring. And so we are using a FIPS validated module, which means that the Kong software is FIPS compliant. And so that's our crypto library for both first-party plugins and also for core components. And so for our FIPS builds, all TLS is handled through this particular library that meets the standards of the government. So this is something that we're really excited about. I think for highly regulated industries and organizations, this is a really good option. And over time, we want to expand the kind of FIPS builds that we offer. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but if you look at downloads.kong.com or our supported platforms, you'll see that we offer a few today. And I think over time, we want to expand that and potentially even offer FIPS compliant containers as well. So if people have, a need for FIPS on a particular platform, please let us know and we'll try to get there. We hope to really expand this over time and also expand our ARM support over time as well. And then I think this might be the last thing that I'm talking about, but this is a latency-based steering. So this is a feature that's actually going into open source. It's been kind of a long requested feature, and it basically allows Kong to load balance to what is the fastest backend based on total response time when proxying to upstream. So this uses a pretty common implementation. It's this, there it is, exponentially weighted moving average. And so it affects, essentially, like each Kong node will pick the upstream that has the average fastest time from its own perspective, right? So if you have two upstream services, one in North America and one in Europe, and you have a Kong node in North America, it's going to select the one that's in North America because to that node, the North America service looks faster. The same could be said about the EMEA service or if there was an APJ service, right? The Kong node will make the decision and it's on a per node basis, depending on what the health checks are returning. So this is a good choice for services that receive a high volume of requests per second because it does need computational data to figure out which backend is the fastest. And so the more traffic it can see, the better of a job it will do in directing that traffic. So this is a good one, I think. We're excited. We're happy to put this one in open source too. We think this is something that the community should have and fulfills a pretty common use case, I think, of what you want from an API gateway. And moving on, we've got this kind of more intuitive Kong Manager experience. So Kong Manager is the UI for Kong Enterprise Edition. And we've made a couple updates. Pretty much, I would say in all releases, we try to make a couple updates for Kong Manager, just because, we're releasing API features so quickly that oftentimes the manager experience can lag the API. But we do like to come back and sort of, for completeness sake, close it out and make sure that we can service our UI users as well. So now you can export the license information from Kong Manager, which is something that's actually been a long requested feature as well. There's also, of course, an API endpoint, but for a business user or even a platform services team, this might be an option that they prefer. And then you can create Kong entities in Kong Manager as well. And then finally, the expression-based router support has gotten a lot stronger in Kong Manager. So for those who don't know, or for those who need a quick reminder, our core routing engine changed as part of the 3 series, where now we've adopted and sort of created this richer routing experience. It's just basically based on the syntax here. I'd say it's like, so it should seem somewhat familiar. I'd say like the industry is kind of converging on this in general. But the idea is that, you can match requests on a lot more fields, and then you can also make your logic a lot more complex by basically using kind of like a pseudocode kind of syntax, combining different header and path components using regex, et cetera. And now Kong Manager provides for full syntax support for that. And then you can also test requests against these routes with the playground as well. So I think those 2 things are really useful. And for people who are on this call, I would certainly encourage you to adopt the new router. This is definitely going to be the area of investment for us when we think about new features that have to do with routing. It's a lot more powerful. I think it's a lot more fun to use. I think you have a lot more control over how it works. And we're excited to get more people on it and have more feedback. It's not enabled by default today, but we think when we cross past the 3 series into the 4 series, that's probably what we will do. So please take it for a spin and give us some feedback. And yeah, that's it for me. I think it was a little quicker than I expected, but I'm happy now to pass it on to Michael, who is the product manager for the Kubernetes Ingress Controller. And then after that, we will take questions.
Thank you very much, Tom.
I will stop sharing now.
And I will start. Okay. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. As Tom said, I am the product manager for Kong Ingress Controller, which is how you run Kong Gateway within Kubernetes. Today I'm going to talk about what Kong Ingress Controller is, just very briefly, in case you're new to it. And I want to talk you through 4 things in our upcoming Kick 2.9 release that I think are really exciting. So let's start right at the beginning. Like, what is Kick? The way that requests get routed within a Kubernetes cluster is requests come in, they hit an ingress controller, and then they get routed to internal services. And what Kong Ingress Controller does is it sits there and it reads your configuration from the Kubernetes API server. So you use your CIDs, custom resource definitions, to configure services and routes and Kong plugins and things like that. You run kubectl apply or use Helm or whatever you're using to manage your Kubernetes deployment. And the Ingress Controller will sit and watch for changes and then apply those changes to the Kong Gateway Dataplane using the admin API, which is what actually handles the incoming requests. The manifest looks something like this. You can see that we've created an ingress. We're matching requests that come into Kong.example, and we're matching requests that go to /echo, and that forwards it into a service in your Kubernetes cluster called Echo. All of this is handled by that controller box. And that is what allows Kong Gateway to actually handle all of the requests. Very, very quick introduction. The Ingress Controller allows Kong Gateway to be Kubernetes native, handle CIDs, and manages reading those CIDs and converting those to Kong Gateway configurations. That's what it's there for. Kick 2.9 brings 4 things that I'm going to talk about today. The first is the Gateway API, which I'm really excited about. The second is GRPC routes, which are really handy for things like bidirectional streaming. We've got Kubernetes events. You can go and read all the logs, but why would you? It's better if the ingress will actually surface what's going wrong directly to you. And then finally, gateway discovery, which is the major feature of the release. which allows you to have one ingress and many Kong gateways. And I'll dig into each of these in a little bit more detail. We'll start with the Gateway API, which is the next generation networking for Kubernetes. We currently use the ingress type to route incoming requests, but the Gateway API has been going from strength to strength, and they recently released 0.6.1. They also released 0.6.2 after I built this deck. Something to call out here is this guy, Shane. So Shane is the chair of the special interest group for the Gateway API. And Shane also happens to be a Kong employee. So Kong is investing heavily in Kubernetes. We've got people dedicated to driving the ecosystem for the good of the entire open source community. So Shane spends a lot of his time making sure that the Gateway API specification works for everyone. It's not just for Kong. The same thing could be used for any ingress controller, any networking on Kubernetes in general. Kik 2.9 is 99% conformant with the Gateway API latest beta. There's just one tricky edge case left, which is what happens when two routes conflict. The Gateway API spec says that we should fall back to alphabetical ordering, and we don't support that today, but that's the only thing we're missing. And you've got to be pretty unlucky if you're hitting an edge case where you rely on routes being ordered alphabetically, and that's way down the list of criteria that decides how to route. The great thing about the Gateway API is it makes the cost of switching almost non-existent. So you can take an ingress controller that implements the Gateway API and swap it out for another one, and you won't notice any difference. Say you're running the Nginx ingress controller and you want to try out Kong, so long as you are running with Gateway API CODs, things should just work. Now, most consumers of the Gateway API will be familiar with HTTP route as a resource. That's what allows you to direct incoming traffic to a specific service. But there are more and more companies today using GRPC. GRPC is built on top of HTTP2. It makes developers' lives easier. It can handle things like bidirectional streaming. It's great for low latency applications. And gRPC servers and clients can be generated automatically, ensuring that the messages being passed back and forth conform to a schema. The Kik 2.9 release adds support for this experimental Gateway API feature. So we don't have to implement this to be conformant. This is an experimental feature, but we feel it's important enough that we wanted to get this in our customers' hands. The third thing is Kubernetes events. I mentioned you can go through the logs and try and work out what's going on, but who's got time to be looking through this and trying to work out what's actually happening? Kong Ingress Controller will take what's going on in Kong Gateway and expose those through the Kubernetes event system for you. So you can do kube control, get events. Here I've passed in a field selector of Kong configuration translation failed. There are two available. I can't remember the other one. It's in the documentation. But we can see immediately when that event happened and what the reason for it is. And here we can't add a target for HTTP bin because I forgot to configure my internal service. So I configured an ingress route for HTTP bin, but didn't actually configure the service in my cluster. So for me, it's like night and day going from, okay, what actually is happening here? Failed posting new config. Why? I didn't add a target. Wonderful. It just makes debugging that much easier. And then finally, Gateway Discovery. And this is my favorite thing in the entire release. So we saw this earlier. The Kubernetes API server talks to the Ingress Controller, which talks to the Dataplane. But in Kick 2.8 and before, the Ingress Controller runs as a sidecar to the Kong Gateway Dataplane. They're in the same pod. In Kick 2.9, we're actually splitting that so you can have independent Ingress pods and Gateway pods. You might be thinking, well, why do I want that? So I'm going to bring it back to something that we all care about, which is money. And these aren't accurate numbers, but they illustrate a point. Imagine that the CPU and RAM and things that the controller takes is $1, and it costs you $1 for every data plane. On your first deployment, it's nice and easy. You've got one ingress, one data plane. That costs you $2 to run. But your service gets more and more popular. And before you know it, you're running 18 pods to handle the traffic. It's costing you $36, $2 for each pod. You've got a controller and a data plane. What Gateway Discovery allows you to do is deploy your Ingress controller separately to your data planes, which means that suddenly instead of spending $36, you've just cut your resource requirements to a much more manageable $17 because you can scale your data planes independently of the controller. You might be thinking, well, what happens if the controller goes down? The good news is that Kong Ingress Controller supports leader election, which means that you can actually run multiple controllers in highly available deployment, and they will work out amongst themselves which one is in charge. And if one goes offline, a new one will take over, sending all of the config to the data planes. Gateway Discovery, I think it's going to be huge for people that have large-scale deployments. It really does reduce the amount of resources that you need to run your deployment. And the final thing to say is how it works, because I forgot that, which is when you start the Ingress controller, you specify a service name, and the Ingress will watch the Kubernetes API server for new nodes that match that service name and automatically register them and send config down. So you can scale up and scale down data planes as you like, and the controller will keep track of things automatically. You don't have to specify all of the downstream admin API endpoints the first time it starts. That is me done. And I think I'm going to bring back Tom so we can get to your questions.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I guess, Michael, should we just go through them from the top to the bottom, and then I guess whoever's product it is. So I guess we have the first question from Gabriel. Thanks for asking, saying, what is FIPS? I believe you're asking what FIPS is. So FIPS is, give me 1 second to look it up on Wikipedia so I get you the right name, but it's an acronym, and it stands for Federal Information Processing Standards. So this is a bunch of standards that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, has put in place for computer systems of non-military American government agencies and contractors. So this is a specific set of governing principles about how software will be used by the government and government contractors. And then FIPS 140-2 is the specific sort of subtext or requirements around crypto libraries and cryptography within software that is used by the military and the American government. Hope that helps. And then the second one from Raj Kumar, is this compatible with Azure? So currently, no, the backup nodes can only be set to GCP or S3, but I think we'd be happy to hear feedback or consider adding Azure in the future. We definitely also want to have Azure support for our current secrets manager integrations as well, and we know a lot of customers are there. So in the next kind of coming weeks and months, we'll actually have a public portal where people can vote on features. managed through a piece of software called AHA. And I would definitely encourage you to share that feedback. Once that portal is live, you should see an announcement about this, but this will be in the next couple of weeks or months or so. And the next question from Luis, what exactly is the difference with the OSS versions of Gateway and the official plugins in terms of FIPS? Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Basically, that's correct. OSS currently is using OpenSSL, and the FIPS builds use boring SSL. We may adopt OpenSSL across both, and then OpenSSL does have like a flag in their 3.0 version where you can kind of like trigger FIPS, but it does have to do, I believe, with the algorithms and cipher suites that are allowed under the FIPS specification. So it is, that's just kind of what it is. But yes, you're correct. We are using different libraries in OSS versus the FIPS enabled builds.
I guess I'll take the next one. I did say that Kong Manager is free. Yes, it does work with Kong Ingress open source. The Ingress Controller can run either the Kong Gateway open source or Kong Gateway Enterprise image. But something to be aware of is that Kong Manager doesn't make sense if you're configuring your gateway with Kubernetes CODs. At that point, you probably want to go all in configuring your gateway data planes with the Admin API and Kong Manager, which is an interface to the Admin API. It is technically possible to mix and match, but it gets quite difficult to work out what's going on there. So I wouldn't recommend it. Raj Kumar, how can this be implemented? Does it consume cost? I'm not sure I follow the question here. Could you add some more details to the Q&A section and we will come back to it? Tom, any release plans for the WebSocket PDK?
Active development backwards and compatible. I don't think there's anything on the immediate roadmap. If there's a specific question or like feature that you would like to see there, yeah, please add it at the bottom and we'll definitely take that feedback. But it's not something that we're, I think, in the short or midterm roadmap. It's not an area of focus.
When I use the Ingress Controller without the gateway, and I saw something in the chat, the question was, can I use only the Ingress Controller to route to Kubernetes services, or do I need the data plane? You will need a data plane. And they can run in the same pods to make it really easy to deploy. But the data plane is what does the routing. Regarding Kik, any time frame for expression-based routing support? Yes, we are evaluating that as we speak. So keep your eyes out for a future Kik release. It will be opt-in. It won't be the default to start with. But if you want to try out the expression-based routing support with Kik, that will be available. Tom, is the Kong Enterprise Docker container free for testing only?
So there is you can run Kong Enterprise in something called free control plane option. So that would be my suggestion there, is to go to Kong Connect and then sign up for a free trial for testing. And also, if you're interested in like engaging with sales, or have serious interest in an enterprise contract as part of a company, we can always issue like a temporary license or something like that. But that, for an on-premise deployment, but that would have to come through kind of more of a formal sales channel to get that license.
I'm not sure if it was me, Tom, but I think you broke up a little bit there. So just to make sure I've got this clear, you can use Kong Enterprise free in production as well without a license, but you won't be able to use enterprise plugins. You will only get Kong Manager for free.
That's correct.
Cool. Thank you. Suren, how to enable the new router in Kong 3.x and when is it going to be enabled by default? The answer for this is your Kong.conf file. If you set router flavor to expressions, you'll be able to use the new DSL-based router. As for when it's going to be enabled by default, that would be a breaking change. So I defer to Tom, but I'm guessing it will be Kong 4.0.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thanks for answering too. I was like looking up the developer, how exactly it's set, but yes.
Gabriel, is Kong Manager what we showed in the presentation? Tom, you showed off Kong Manager.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you want to take that for a spin, you can download Kong Enterprise and run it without a license, which puts it in free mode, which gives you an example of what it looks like. Also, if you use Connect, which is like our cloud hosted control plane. So in that model, you still host your own data planes.
I think he froze again.
And you own that infrastructure. I saw, well, I froze?
Your internet, yeah, your internet stopped a little bit, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I guess just to answer it again, hopefully it doesn't freeze, that you can take Kong Manager for a spin with Kong Enterprise in free mode, and you can also use Kong Connect, which is our cloud hosted control plane where you still own the data plane infrastructure, and that has a UI as well. And I do see one question, it's not in the Q&A, but it's in the messages from Sachin about versions of Java for custom plugin development. So there are no plans for Java. However, in 3.3, our goal is to get a version of WASM support out there, which we're probably going to put under the label of a tech preview. And we're targeting Rust, Go, and JavaScript for that WASM support. So it's a really interesting project and one we're excited about. It's a much more performant than I think our existing PDKs for other languages that are not Lua. And we're also, at least in this first version, adopting the ABI. So like the basically standard for WASMX implementation. So keep an eye out for that. So we're really excited about.
Right, I think we are out of questions. Last chance to get them in. All right, back to you, Dahlia.
Thank you very much, Michael. Tom, that was a great presentation from both of you. And thanks everyone who asked questions. We appreciate you being here and we look forward to seeing you at our next events next month. Hope you have a great day ahead, great evening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.